here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the musician, singer, songwriter, guitarist. It's the one and only John Fiddler, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry. Member of Medicine Head, who started in the late 60s, early 70s, and was on Dandelion Records, that was started by John Peel. And also he was in various other bands during the 80s, British Lions, and also another combo titled Box of Frogs, and has recently brought out 2 albums, one titled Warriors of Love and also Heartwork, which are both titled as Medicine Head Records. Anyway, this is the interview, so after several minutes of interest but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. John, it's over to you.
Mine was definitely, hearing people like Lightning Hopkins and Muddy Waters for the first time, then hearing all the old blues guys, basically, Howlin' Wolf. I mean, there's a lot of, when I was a kid, there was a lot of good pop music around, like all of the Phil Spector stuff, the Wall of Sound, the Ronettes, the etc. I mean,
yes.
I loved all that. There was some really good. Obviously, there was the Beatles, the Stones. I mean, you can't go wrong, with really good early stuff there. But my personal influence was, from musically anyway, was all of the old blues dudes.
Yes,
got me going.
Because you were born the same year as David Bowie and Lemmy from Motorhead and Hawkwind fame. I mean, when they were ever asked that kind of question, they'd always both say, not in the same room, but they'd always say Little Richard and then, Buddy Holly, Eddie Cochran.
Well, that's really what I'm saying. I mean, we were spoiled for choice, with the very first record I bought, for example, was, if you know what a 78 is.
Oh, yes.
was a 78 of Buddy Holly, Peggy Sue.
Right.
So we had Little Richard, there was him, and I was just read him from Macon, Georgia, had the most ridiculously amazing voices. We were blessed with rock and roll. I mean, real rock and roll.
And
so
people like and what about people like Fats Waller and because I know
Fats Waller. You mean Fats Domino?
Fats Domino, yes, that's the one. God, I'm
Fats
so good.
Domino. Well, the thing about Fats Domino is it's New Orleans, and that is amazing. And we had a massive hit with a song called One and One is One. And my feeling at the time when I was writing that was it would be like a New Orleans Fats Domino type rolling piano, like a low end, the high end roll on the piano, and that was based really around that kind of feeling. So, yeah, I mean, all that was amazing for us. We were very, very lucky as kids to have that to listen to. And I was luckier than maybe a lot of people because I have 2 older sisters who were rock and roll crazy. And it was through them really that I first heard what I think could have been Muddy Waters on the radio, because they constantly had Radio Luxembourg playing, which was the only station that played any rock and roll. And one of the DJs played this piece of music which just knocked me off my feet, and it was like, it must have been Muddy Waters or Howlin' Wolf. It's got to be one of those major big sound harmonica blues, fantastic. Just amazing.
Yes. And then we had
all rock and roll's based on that anyway. I mean, it all comes from there. Everything comes from there. It's like, it's crazy how amazing that is.
And with
You
that
know.
kind of interests also kind of all things jazz and bebop as well. I mean, did literature come into your life, like people like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg in the
Totally.
60s?
Yeah. I mean, that's why I said, influences musically. The biggest influence in my life is a sculptor, actually, an artist named Brancusi, who, he changed my life basically. And then apart from that, the beat poets, I've got several versions of, including the scroll version of On the Road, and Gregory Corso, uh, everybody to do, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, everyone in the beat poets, and that whole kind of movement there was, it's kind of crucial to us. It was a freedom. It was a real, uh, I don't know, how do you say it, like a literary and literal blessing. It's just incredible.
Yes, absolutely. God, that sounds so. That sculpture, because I'll have to go back and go and check him out. Was Brand? Did you say Cruzy?
Brancusi, Brancusi, him, Modigliani, and Giacometti. They were my three huge influences in that area. And for me, there's not really. I try not to separate too much between what's influential visually or audibly, or just it's if it creates the emotions with me, that's it. It doesn't matter what it is. It's like poetry and whatever it is. It's just,
Yes.
this is where I come from anyway.
So when we got to 16, I wasn't 16 at this point. Sort of, I was probably about 3 at the time, 1967. But you were probably about 16. There was the sort of the Summer of Love, and John Peel had his Perfume Garden. Were you already sort of quite hip to the trip on that kind of world that was kind of happening around you?
Totally, and that's how, that's where we were. I was actually in '67. I was 18,
Ah,
coming up to 19. So in September of '67, I was 19.
right.
And,
So that's a perfect
yeah, I
period.
mean, yeah, I
And
was
had
at
you
compulsory art
left
school.
school at 16?
I went to art school. I was going to say what I call anyway, compulsory art school for rock and rollers. So many of us went to art school and then went into making songs. So yeah, I mean, I left school after A levels, went to art school, dropped out of art school, and just went, by some massive stroke of luck, went into what we did.
Yes. And had you started going to things like UFO and, that scene that Joe Boyd had sort of created on Tottenham Court Road and places like that? Were you
Well,
already
I'm not.
sort of...
No, because I'm not a Londoner. I'm a Midlander. In fact, I'm from the Black Country, what we call the Black Country.
Yes,
So
Wolverhampton.
I didn't live in London at that time. We were based in the Midlands there, and we used to do shows with Black Sabbath, and I mean, when I was at school, I booked what were what would later become Slade.
I was going to ask
Uh,
you if Slade were in your world, and
well, they
yes.
were called the In-Betweens at the time, and I was kind of, I don't know, chairman of the sixth form social committee or whatever it was. We were going to take over the world and fill it full of bands and
Yes.
music. And yeah, I booked the In-Betweens at that point.
This was
Yeah.
before they went through their Chaz Chandler and Skinhead
Way
phase.
before. I mean, I'm talking about, they weren't even called Ambrose Slade
Ambrose, yes, this is the
at
classic,
that
isn't it?
point. They were called it the In-Between. So yeah, it was way before. And Chaz
Yes.
managed me as well. I mean, he managed Medicine Head for a while.
Nice. My God, that's incredible. So with you, when you went to art school, was this also in the Midlands or did you leave home at that stage?
I left home at that point. Yeah, I went to Stafford Art School for a year, I think it was, or a year, I think. And then I was offered a place in St. Martin's in London. And one of my good friends, Ricky Clark, we all went to school together and all went to art school together. He was moving on to Leicester Art School. And Peter Hope-Evans, who was my partner in Medicine Hat, eventually, he was going to go to Leicester Art School. And I thought, I'm going to get into Leicester Art School instead of going down to London. And that's what I did. Yeah. So,
Yes.
interesting. The Ricky Clark, who is one of my best old pals and sadly has passed away, but his daughter was in Game of Thrones. She was the Emilia Clarke, the lovely
Amelia
young
Clark,
thing.
God, I'm a little bit because I've seen her in a few films and plays, and she's amazing. And then I heard her story where she's had that, her brain operation.
Yeah, I mean, and she's done amazing work. She set up a whole trust and charity to help people in the same situation that she was in, which is amazing. I mean, they're lovely people, lovely family.
So was Ricky Clark the father? Do you say, or the
Millie's dad? Yeah.
Oh my God!
Amelia's father. Yeah.
Oh wow, God.
So yeah,
slightly speechless on that point. I was like, oh God, that's
but
just
there are wonderful coincidences in life, aren't there?
There are so many, and
expand your life nicely. I mean, I remember somebody telling me about that series, and I thought, well, it's a strange name, isn't it? Whatever.
Yes.
And of course, and I don't watch TV, and series especially. I can't.
Yes.
I think I don't have the attention span or something.
Me too.
But anyway, she was gorgeous as a tiny little thing in my arms when she was first born, and is gorgeous now. So
yeah. And I see the pictures of her and her mum, and it's like, God, that's. I guess that was your.
Jenny,
yeah. Again, was it an OBE she got recently, or they got?
Do you know? I don't know, but I'd hope so because they deserve it.
I think in the last month they suddenly appeared again and was like getting some sort of kind of thing for all their work, work on charity and.
Yeah. Well, Rick, I mean, he worked with us for a while when we had Medicine Head going in the early days.
Wow. God, that's kind of left me speechless, really. God, that's just boggling. Yeah, God, that's just. So when did you start playing music at this stage? When did music kind of, obviously you were there in the art world and was well ensconced in it, but when did you sort of think?
Yeah, I mean, at home, we had a piano that was my father's piano, and I sort of taught myself to play piano a bit, and I was writing songs on the piano. And eventually, after school and all kinds. Well, let me break it down a little bit more. A friend of mine who was a bass player, left-handed bass player, had a father who was from Chicago. And so they'd go back to Chicago lots of times a year, come back laden with blues albums, old vinyl blues, well, new at the time,
Yes.
vinyl blues albums. And his name was Charles Kirinich. And he taught me 2 or 3 chords on his left-handed acoustic guitar. And so, that was my kind of introduction to guitar. But I was playing piano and writing songs, and Peter Hope-Evans would come over and he'd play harmonica. And eventually someone said to us, another friend from school came over to the house, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know." I don't know. We're just writing the songs and stuff. He said, "Where are you playing?" Nowhere. What do you mean nowhere? Well, no. We haven't got a car. What do you mean you haven't got a car? I'll be over tomorrow and we'll go get a car. Right. So anyway, this guy was amazing. He went to school with us. His name was Andrew Lilly. And he was already like, I don't know, he was taking over the world at the time. He was like managing director of some small but obviously very vibrant company in Birmingham or the Black Country or somewhere. Anyway, he came over to the house the next day and said, "Right, we'll get a car. Let's go." And it's like, well, hang on, I haven't got any money. He said, don't worry. So off we went, and we bought a Vauxhall Victor in a junkyard for £5, £5. And I had to drive it because there's nobody else to drive it, right? I hadn't got a license, no insurance.
I was going to ask you if you had that license, but
no, didn't have a license for ages. I mean, I drove it out straight into a lamppost.
classic.
I don't know. Somehow we survived, and this thing was crazy. It became our first, not quite a transit van, but it was our first. I don't know, band transport.
Yes.
And those old Vauxhall Victors, they had spring leaf suspension, and the springs on this car were completely gone. They were held together by clamps. And we found this out, I think, the first time we took it out with a couple of amps in the back and people and guitars, stuff, and driving along the road with no license, no insurance, and nothing at all. And bang, the leaf spring clamps just separated, and we were just there, stuck in the middle of the road,
Yes.
And that happened all the time. And I don't know, somehow we never got caught. We were always like lucky, and we were making our own luck because someone said we were like guerrilla giggers, We'd just go and gate crash places and bang on the door, so can we play, just get there before anybody else got there, and set up our gear, and not worry about a thing, which is the best way to be, and just in you go. And
yes.
either you play or they'd say you got to go, which rarely ever happened. And anytime we played anywhere, we always got booked back for a fee. It could have been £5, £5, but that's the way it was in those days.
Yes.
£5, £10. We always got booked back. And there you go. We'd got a car by that time, and that paid for it. So,
absolutely.
Then you were talking about John Peel earlier, and we found out that John was playing at the Lafayette Club in Wolverhampton, and Jethro Tull, I think, were the main band. And we did listen to the Perfume. We did know all that. We knew everything about John, and we knew his amazing kind of interest in more oblique kind of stuff, and not just chirpy, cheap or whatever, and so we knew that we knew he was into real good stuff. So we went to that club, and we said we were Jethro Tull. I just went to the guys on the door and said, "We're Jethro Tull. Can we get our gear in?" And so we got our equipment in, set it up, and then eventually Jethro Tull arrived.
Awkward.
And of course we were not Jethro Tull. Hilarious. Anyway, I persuaded them to let us play for John for about 15 minutes. He wasn't even there. He was out having fish and chips somewhere or something. And he caught the last 5 minutes, I believe, and asked us to send him a tape because he really enjoyed what he saw, the 5 minutes. He said, "Send me a tape." So that gave birth to, I don't know if you're aware of Medicine Head folklore and, mythology and legend, but we did these very famous kitchen tapes, the kitchen tapes, which we recorded on an old Grundig steam-driven tape recorder in the kitchen. Got those down to John, and eventually John Lennon said to Peel, you just got to release this just as it is and sign them up, And then Clapton got involved, and Pete Townshend, and a lot of heavy hitters got behind us and gave us a good push, and John signed us. And,
Yes, this is quite boggling, isn't it? I mean, sort of looking back on that, does seem you had rock royalty sort of, yes, giving you the sort of thumbs up. Did you feel a bit surreal at that stage? Did it feel like a sort of a bit of an odd situation, or was it just of its time and these things just happened if you believed?
it was absolutely, yeah, mind blowing, really. I mean, we were just a couple of people from the Midlands with no. Well, Pete's actually from South Wales, but his father was moved in his job to the Midlands, which is rather fortuitous for us. Um, but yeah, I mean, we were like all awestruck. It was just like when we went down to London to sign the contract with John Peel. We arrived at his house, and it was a Mews house off Regent's Park Mews or something. And he came to the door at the ground floor, and the living room is on the next floor up. And we walked up, and there, sitting on the floor, cross-legged, as you'd expect in a way, was Mark Bolan. So Mark was sitting there with his wife, June, who was actually sitting there, actually crocheting or knitting a little tank top with stars and moons all over it. I mean, you cannot make this up, and this is the way it was.
Yes.
And so we walked in, and it's like, you just like stopped in your tracks. Meeting John Peel again, who hadn't seen him since we were Jethro Tull, and you walk in there, and there's Mark Bolan. It's like, hey, and he just says, "Hey, how you doing?"
Yes, I
And
guess
yeah,
this
and
was
it's kind of
Mark
amazing.
in his very sort of folk mystical period, wasn't it? The when my people were fair and had stars in their hair. That kind of was
Yeah, right.
around that time where he was making beautiful
Magically.
poetry. So were you also part of that kind of, or got drawn into that folk beatnik kind of peace movement as well? Was that people like Al Stewart and I suppose Bob Dylan, but
I don't think we ever joined any kind of movement at all, actually. We were already peaceniks, if that's the right word.
yes.
We were described as folk proto-punk in 1968, 69, because we kind of, what we played went between it like a bulldozer running down the street as fast as it could to the gentlest thing you could ever hear. So we straddled or crossed all boundaries and borders. It wasn't important to us, to be in a movement. It's like, and I still am the same. I'm very not. I'm not stoical. I'm not anti anything, but I'm definitely outside of the whatever it is.
Yes. So did you?
I mean, Bob Dylan said a wonderful thing in one of his songs. He said, "To live outside the law, you got to be honest." And I've always believed that, and I always felt that, and I kind of live there, in that place. I don't feel like I need to um, congregate. It's I'm very gregarious. I have wonderful friends, but I don't feel like I need to be part of a movement or something. I don't know.
What was that quote again? Just that to be the Bob Dylan quote.
Oh, to live outside the law, you have to be honest.
Right. Yes. Interesting, isn't it?
Or it could be, you've got to be honest. It's either to live outside the law, you've got to be honest, or to live outside the law, you have to be honest. It's one of those.
Yes. Well, no, I get the gist. Because at that stage, I mean, obviously John Peel was still a very sort of cult little figure, but he started this record label, wasn't it? Dandelion Records with Clive. Is it Selwood? Was that the...
Selwood, yeah.
Yes. So at that stage, was John on a mission as well in his kind of life to not only be promoting these bands, but also to sort of give them a place to sort of record in a rather, happy, innocent and slightly, making, a bit like Richard Branson, I suppose, wanting to create something kind of beautiful. Were you part of that dream?
I'm sure we were, and John was. I mean, don't forget that John made his way to wherever he came to put the record company together by being the kind of alternative, the one who gave an ear to people who would not be listened to in normal circumstances. I mean, we would never have been played on the BBC, for example, if it hadn't been for John Peel and many, many others. John championed a lot of people who would not have got a break, and we were certainly one of those people. And
Yes.
it still goes on, John's legacy from that level still continues, and the people that he championed later on, like, for example, Jack White, the White Stripes and etc.
Yes.
He quotes us as being like one of the best things he heard one of the years that, the best thing that happened to him was Medicine Head. And I know that came straight from John because John championed the White Stripes, and John obviously sent him or gave him some of our records, and Jack went off and listened to it and was like, wow, didn't know there's this. And we were a duo, making a big noise. And I think Jack likes that,
Yes, no, he definitely does. Because the single, His Guide in Hand, this is the one that John Peel, was that in his box of most precious records that there was a documentary. Was that one of them? Was that in that particular collection?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, it is.
You must have felt very touched when you realised that.
Well, I was and am and continue to be. I always will be, but it's almost like it's part of our life, if you can understand what I'm saying there. It was part of what we did, which meant a lot to the people involved at that time, who were living it. John Peel, myself, Peter Hope-Evans, we were all living that life, and it was a big part of that life.
Yes.
So it was not necessarily a surprise. It was just a great gift, really, for all of us. It drew us together, and that was the song. And I'm sure that version was the one that John Lennon and Yoko said, this just has to go out as raw as it is. It has to go out like that, because the feeling on it, the emotional content of it, is far more important than the hi-fi, low-fi, or any old fi you want to mention. But it's all about the feeling, and the feeling on that is really quite extraordinary, and it's tangible. It's really quite tangible.
Yes.
So that's what everyone recognized.
Absolutely. And then as that sort of decade came to a close, I mean, there was the death of Brian Jones, and then, the next year, Hendrix, Joplin and Morrison all die, and there's Woodstock one moment, then there's Altamont. The 60s, the Beatles break up as well. There's Vietnam. There's a huge amount of problems. How was it for you? Because going into that period of recording that first album when, still very young, so many things change so quickly.
Well, when I was a kid, I always used to say to everybody, I was 2,000 years old. And I kind of, by that, I mean, people talk about an old soul or whatever. And I'm not talking about religion or anything like that. I'm talking about more spirituality. There's more of a spiritual content in my life than any kind of religion, for example. And a lot of what was going on at that time you'd have people doing exactly the same as it had been doing all through the centuries, doing things in the name of something else, which basically made no sense and was filled with lies, deception, and fear. And what I couldn't be part of that, and neither could Peter Hope-Evans. And I hope he doesn't mind me talking for him on that level. But we were probably sort of fairly insulated in a way, or isolated. We were a bit like not emotional, but religious dropouts, draft dodgers of the God Squad. We wouldn't be part of anything that promoted anything to do with the Vietnams, or we promoted the people who were trying to close that down, and talk and be peaceful and be kind, gentle human beings, loving, actually helping each other, and in the name of love, not killing people in the name of whatever, they're commies or whatever it may be. We were never involved in that kind of thinking or anything like that. We remained pure to a different feeling.
Yes,
which is pretty obvious, for what we did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, kind of fascinating period. And then the album sort of came together. Was it a session that you recorded? I know Black Sabbath did their first album in an afternoon, I believe. So folklore has us believe. Did you also go in and record your first album sort of almost in one take as well?
It was, yeah. It was exactly that. Dear John Peel produced it. We were in Regent Street, CBS Studios in Regent Street, I think it was. And any fact checkers can do that, because I'd like to know if that was true. I was there, but I can't remember it. Anyway, we did do the whole thing in one go, just like a gig. We had no idea how to record. We set up everything. We had this little Vox 100 watt PA system, which I sang through, and I used a Shure SM57 microphone, and then we had like mega expensive Neumann microphones on miking up the PA system, which was worth about £2. It was fabulous, because it was like really high, really lo-fi, because it was just simply as we played, and that was it. It was just a gig, and it was all over and done. I mean, we did the whole thing. It was about 2.5 hours mixing everything, and I didn't know what mixing was. We had no idea, and it was just like, everything was all just put together and done. We were out of there, and yeah.
Yes, it's interesting. Yes. So once that came out, did you then suddenly find yourself on the touring circuit of the UK or elsewhere? Did you go to Europe at all?
We did go to Europe, yeah. But, we had already been sort of ramping it up, and John, prior to us recording, John used to take us to his gigs. And, he'd just have us play, just ask the promoters, I'd really like, if this band would play. And so they'd give us like half an hour or something. And we weren't supposed to be there, but John would pay us out. He would pay us out of his fee.
Yes,
it was just a diamond, just a.
Because I think T-Rex had done something similar, hadn't he? Sort of as a duo, sort of going along with John Peel, sort of yes, DJ sort of.
I bet so. Yeah, I don't know, but I bet that's the truth. Yeah.
And during that period, that very early 70s, there was this interesting movement that started to happen of fairs and festivals that started to spring up. Because I come from East Anglia, and there was a group of people who put on the Barsham fairs and then the Albion fairs. And there was a sort of a real sort of movement from the cities into the country, and this kind of idea of living off the land. There was Crank's restaurant and cookbook. I think there was the self-sufficiency movement that started to appear. People became interested in ley lines, getting back to the earth and visiting stone circles. Did you also pick up on that slightly romantic kind of ideal of the English countryside and yes, moving closer to nature?
Well, we lived on a farm from 1967, I think it was, out right in the country. I mean, it was on a private road. We rented cottages on a farm called Home Farm in a place called Ingestree near
Whereabouts? What?
Stafford. Near
Stafford.
Stafford, yeah. It was the Earl of Shrewsbury's estate, I think it was. And we lived there from then till the early 70s. So we were already doing it, you know. I mean, it didn't have to be. We were pretty much rebels anyway, and if that's the right word. But we didn't. I tried to explain earlier on. We didn't have to try to be part of a movement, as it were. We were just there,
Yes.
you know.
Well, it's just interesting because there was a lot of communes starting as well, wasn't there, during that period?
That's right. Yeah.
And there was.
I don't know whether either Peter or myself were really of the commune mentality, because we were too busy trying to. We were too busy creating stuff, you know, and so our lives were pretty full, and we were doing the guerrilla gigging, you know, we were working so much. Somebody said we held the record for the amount of gigs done in a year in the UK. And
nice.
I believe it because we were just always out there, you know. And then over to Europe, you were saying earlier on, where did we go? Yeah, we did. And it was fabulous, you know. I speak French and I speak German, and I love that. I like to go to countries and speak their language, you know, and not expect them to be talking my language. You know?
Yes,
I like to share language.
Yes.
Share the communication, you know, all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I don't think I certainly can talk for myself, obviously, but I wasn't, I liked the whole peace movement because I believe in peace and love. That's what I believe in. To be part of a commune, I don't think would have been. We never even thought about it because we were too busy. Our commune was wherever we were, you know.
Yes.
And we were literally on the road, and so same as lots of rock and roll bands at the time, you know, we were all just out there in a different place and different place every night, and there you go. That was your.
Because it was just interesting, because I mentioned the Barsham and Albion fairs of East Anglia, but there was also a lot of, at that time, there was a real utopian feeling that things were changing, or potentially, and there was a lot of kind of early theatre companies that started to appear as well, and they would be touring both the UK and Europe, and I think there was one called Incubus, and there was various other ones that I'd sort of come across and interviewed various members. So there was a sort of a real sense of people who've been to art school, done a few years, thought, I know, let's start a experimental theatre company, whatever, you know, we'll break the mold and just do our own thing. And then there was a band called the Global Village Trucking Company that featured people like James Lascelles, and they lived in a house, I think near Southwold and then again near Diss. And it wasn't a commune, it was just a gang, it was just the band basically all lived together for those few years.
We lived in a row of cottages, you know.
Yes.
But there were only two of us in the band, but there were various other people, you know. So yeah, I mean, from that viewpoint, yeah, And John signed Principal Edward's Magic Theatre, which is another kind of large membership band, or group of performers. And Quintessence, also a large.
Yes.
He signed those too. And yeah, it was a great time, I mean, they were probably, I think one of the interesting things about Medicine Head is that, when people say to me, oh, you're a musician, I say, no. No, I'm not. I'm a magician. I kind of help people to think that I'm a musician. I make them think I am, because my qualities as a musician are very simple. Oh gosh, excuse me. They're very simple, and I don't look for. I'm not a virtuoso player or anything like that. They're wonderful players. I'm not interested in that so much as the kind of complexity of simplicity. So that's where I kind of get my rocks off, as we used to say.
Yes.
Rather than anything else. So we weren't like a musical troupe. Peter played a mouth bow and a Jaws harp and pieces of wood, just like percussion, bits of sticks, just clapped together, and I had a bass drum and a hi-hat. I mean, the crazy thing, David, the first bass drum we found in a junk shop, and it was an old orchestral bass drum. It was a 32-inch bass drum, really, really big, and it had this little splash cymbal on the top, and it was rotting. Yeah. So every time we played a gig, at the end of the night, we moved the drum, and there'd be like a pile of sawdust there, or rotting sawdust from the drum. It eventually, I destroyed it just by playing it. But that's how we started, really. It was just, it didn't matter what it was. We'd get a sound out of it, and kind of, it would fill the feeling rather than, oh my God, that's, a 1948 Slingerland drum,
Yes.
It was just
Yes.
something you could thump and make a noise out of, and which sounded good,
Amazing. And then you obviously on a roll, because you sort of a bit like David Bowie in the 70s, you bring out virtually an album a year for quite a period of time. So your second album, you had no problem, finding material or sort of creating more material to record another batch of songs.
I don't think so. I mean, we didn't look. It was very early days, so it wasn't like we were looking to do one album, then do another and another and another. It was just like breathing. Part of what we do. So there wasn't a kind of commercial pressure. We didn't live extravagant lives or anything like that. We didn't need to. We just wanted to get out, play to as many people as we possibly could.
Yes.
Play as many gigs as we could, meet as many people as we could, and share what we had to share. And
Where was the second album recorded? Because you had Keith from the Yardbirds on this one, didn't you?
I think it was recorded, at least some of it was recorded at the Marquee.
Right.
The Marquee Studios. And that's where we recorded. Well, actually, I'll tell you the real beginnings. One night we were playing up in the Midlands somewhere, or the North somewhere, and I wrote this song called Pictures in the Sky, and we just went on stage, and I just started playing it. And the beauty of what we could do, because there were only two of us, and like I said, Pete would either bash some claves together or some bits of stick together, or play a Jew's harp or a mouth bow, or a harmonica. and he just started playing the Jew's harp on this thing, and we'd sort of, I'd started messing around with it in the dressing room before, going on and tuning up and all that sort of stuff, and went on. And I just went into it, and we had to play it about 4, 5, or 6 times, and without any joking whatsoever. Everybody loved it. Pictures in the Sky. So when I first met Keith, who was managed by the same people that were managing, we had now been signed to a management company through John Peel. And they were managing Keith Relf, and Keith was kind of looking for things to do because he finished with Renaissance and with Illusion, I think, was another band that he'd had after the Yardbirds, and he was like in between and looking for production jobs or whatever. And so he came up on board. We met up with him, and we got on really well. Keith became a really good close friend. In fact, eventually we lived next door to each other. He moved his family and lived next door. It was just a great time. Really good, life affirming, wonderful time. And so anyway, Keith did produce that second album, or most of it, I think, or maybe it was all of that and some of another one. I don't know, but yeah. So Keith and we recorded another kitchen tape of Pictures in the Sky, which is around somewhere. I think it's on one of the Cherry Red Medicine Head releases. They've got the kitchen version of Pictures in the Sky, where it was lovely working with Keith because he had those few years on me, and obviously amazing experiences of being with the Yardbirds, and he loved experimenting with recording. So we had like rolled up newspaper on the tabletop for a snare drum, and I think I just sort of sang like a bass, like a little bit of bass in there, and yeah, we built this tracker, and then we went into the Marquee Studios and started work on the second album.
Yes, my God, that's amazing. Did you have the same sort of pleasant experience doing that as the debut album? Did that sort of flow as easily?
It did, and it was very different, as well, because Keith, having already had the experience of recording with a band and all that sort of more intricate recording techniques, etc. It was good. He brought more to the table. Consequently, it did change. And I think there are tracks there that Peter's not even on. And I think if you know the history of Medicine Head, you'll know that Peter left just after we had the hit with Picture in the Sky.
Yes.
So I think it started to build then, because I think maybe he felt like he was out of the picture a little bit. Couldn't have been more wrong, but that's the way he was feeling.
Yes.
And there was like a bass player and a drummer, and it's like, wow, it's different. And my thoughts are always, the only constant thing in life is change, and that's the reality. Things don't stay the same. Things are not the same. And, let's talk, whatever it is, don't let that overcome you. And, Peter had to go away he just said, I can't do this, and he went away for a year or so, maybe not quite a year, I'm not sure. But he came back, and he was stronger than ever and really got back into being in Medicine Head,
Yes.
And in between times, Keith, again, he was looking for more things to do. And I said, well, Pete, we obviously by that time Peter had left. And I said, well, why don't you join up with me for a while, and see what happens? And we recorded, I'd written all these songs and called this album Dark Side of the Moon, way before the illustrious and wonderful Dark Side of the Moon from Pink Floyd. It's an amazing album.
Yes.
But I had an album before they had an album called Dark Side of the Moon. And their album was called Eclipse for a year or a year and a half. And then when my album didn't go any further, they changed the name of Eclipse into Dark Side of the Moon.
Yes. God,
Which is great, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I've been very lucky in terms of writing songs and delivering them. I can't say that all of them are like amazing or good or whatever. But I do continue to write.
Yes.
And I'm very lucky, right now, with hard work, here we are with another album of songs. So I just feel so lucky. But we work hard, and sometimes you've got to realize that you make your own luck. You've got to get in there and get the blood dripping off the ends of your fingers. Where you've been playing the guitar too much.
Yes, because there's the third album, which is on Dandelion. Was that at the point that Dandelion Records was kind of finishing up? Was that the kind of end of that label, or did you know?
I think it was our last one, yeah, and I think that was it, pretty much, because we were the only band that actually made anything, and that wasn't enough, we were the only ones that charted or made any significant inroads into paying back.
How did you? But it was kind of amazing, because having done so many interviews, most bands last 3 albums, if they're lucky. Really, they have a 5-year narrative. I mean, obviously, I'm a bit of an 80s indie kid, so, it would be like get a single, John Peel plays it, John Peel session, I know, and the decades, aren't they? And then they get that first album together. Mostly in the 80s, it was always produced by Dal Griffin from, Mott the Hoople, and then they get that first album, they get the little transit van, they go around the UK, all the arts centres and clubs. That's going quite well. The second album, better producer, things are going a little bit better possibly, but then the tension of the band, and then possibly the third album, if they can get that far, and it's all over. But you sort of do 3 albums, then you signed to Polydor. How did that come together? How did you manage to sort of get a sort of get onto a major label?
We changed management companies again, I think through John Peel, and the guy who managed Keith. And Peter Hope-Evans came back. And one good thing, really, if I can say this, is that Medicine Head always has had a good kind of credibility throughout all of the years. People, we've maintained our credibility, as it were, and we've maintained good relationships, and we've worked hard to respect and give respect, and I think that's kind of been very important for me anyway, because I like to, in a relationship with anyone, I like to have them understand that I really care, and I hope that makes sense. I mean, I don't believe in waiting at the curbside for a lift, coming specifically for me. I'm the kind of person who would organize a lift for everybody else, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
So I'm kind of taking that on board, when we and I've just realized I didn't answer one of your questions fully, but I may get back to it. But when Dandelion was going down, or not going down, but just realizing that it wasn't going to work out, we did get some interest from various other companies, and Polydor, they kind of came up with something for us, a deal for us, and so we went with it.
Yeah, that was just. Did with the return of Peter, did that sort of feel quite a holistic kind of healing time?
It's like, with us, it's almost like time doesn't matter. Time's unimportant. It's more like it's what's happened between this song or that song or this moment of importance or another moment of great significance. It's the rest of it. When we were at school, a bunch of us developed like no speak, but we had a language, but we didn't talk.
Yes.
We went into kind of understanding what was going on without having to say anything, and so when Peter came back, it was not a surprise, and it was but it was fantastic, not a surprise, but I may as well say a massive surprise, because and a massive welcome, but not really a surprise. It was just wonderful to get back working with him.
Yes.
And I don't think it really happened for him because he left again eventually. But I think I think he felt kind of like he'd moved on, and unlike the other time when maybe I'd moved on or something, and but I never excluded Pete. Pete kind of went, and I don't know, maybe we'd lost that original that original kind of innocence almost, the beginnings. And you're
Yes.
talking about earlier 3 albums, and that was it. If people ask us to play any more these days, which does happen, Pete's expressed an interest in maybe playing the first album, and that would be it. Just do a gig, play the first album, and no more. So, he's still like affiliated, but it's defined.
Interesting, isn't it? When you did your the final album for the As Medicine Head, this was at Pete Townshend's studio, Eel Pie Island Studios. Is that on Eel Pie Island, by the way?
It wasn't Eel Pie Island. Excuse me. A good friend of ours who had helped us in the early days, Pete Townshend, had various enterprises that all came under the Eel Pie banner, because he lived on Eel Pie, not on the island, but it was all Twickenham, and that area
Yes.
is, in rock and roll terms, Eel Pie Island is legend. It's massively like mythology. It's like the Camelot of rock and roll. And Pete had quite a few different enterprises going on called Eel Pie, and
Right.
we were completely stony broke when we went to Eel Pie Studios, which was there were several. He had a barge on the Thames, off. It wasn't anywhere near Eel Pie at the time we were using it, but he said to us, you can just go in there and make some records, record something, so we didn't know quite what to do at this point. This was after Polydor and after One and One is One, and we'd been royally ripped off, and we were basically broke. And Pete said, come out to Goring on Thames, where he had a house on the Thames, and he had a boathouse converted into a recording studio. And so he said, just bring an engineer and use it as long as you want, I mean, just such a kind and wonderful friend, just what can you say?
Yes, absolutely.
It was like, he helped us so much. Incredible. So that's what you're referring to is that, I believe.
Right. Yes, because it's such a legendary place, isn't it? And so many people talk about that
Well,
famous
Eel
thing.
Pie Island is something completely different. I mean, Eel Pie Island's in Twickenham. Eel Pie studios for Pete were not,
No.
out there.
And what
In
was the
Gordon.
atmosphere like when you were recording that? Because this is the last album by the band. Did you feel there was some sort of completion that was going to be the last one?
No, but Pete was more and more remote. He felt more. I think he just felt like he didn't kind of want to be there in a way. But I can't. I don't know. I don't know.
Yes.
But I do know that we had a drummer there, and we had a bass player. We had, because we'd expanded and it added a bass drummer and guitar player, so we added 3 pieces, as well as Pete and me. So where Pete was the kind of main man in terms of laying down all of the lead stuff, now there was a guitar player as well. And so, I don't know. I mean, I can't think about it too much. I can't rationalize it too much, but things had moved on. Like I said before, the only constant thing in life is change, and we were going through a big changing period again. Making this album, it was more apparent, I think, that somehow Pete was about to leave again. And we went and we slogged all around the country again in the back of the van, with all the gear, and we got back in the charts, I think, with a song called, I can't remember. Oh, it's called "It's Natural,"
Right.
on the Barn label with Chaz. That's when Chaz started managing us, and we did like all these gigs, the guerrilla gigging again, and doing loads and loads of gigs, and we got back in the chart in the top 40, I think, and everything had begun to come back again. And even though the punks were out there, we were kind of great with the punks because we loved that energy, and so we were quite at home with all that. And just one day Pete said, I'm going, I'm leaving. And it was kind of, it's hard, but anyway, bless him, off he went, and he's done some great stuff since, which is the thing that I like most of all. He's worked again with Pete Townshend. He did that. He had a couple of bands with Rob Townshend.
Yes, from Family.
Yeah, and Rob was in. He played drums for us, and then him and Pete put a band together called the Dance Band, I think it was. And I think Pete was also in the blues band for a very short period of time, which was like Paul Jones, Tom McGuinness, Rob Townshend, Gary Fletcher, and I think Pete was in that for a while.
Yes. So how do you then navigate that sort of period when you realise the band is finally over, Mark 1, I suppose? But yes, for the rest of the decade, where do you sort of go to next?
Well, it was a hard time, I suppose, because it was like we'd just done all this work. I mean, loads and loads of gigs, and we'd got back into the top 50. We're in the top 40 actually, but and then that's not there. So what I did was I finished off all the gigs that were in the book at the time with a friend of mine named Morgan Fisher, who was in Mott the Hoople.
Oh, yes.
And he was a good friend. We'd had a band together called British Lions in between times, where I joined up with the Mott the Hoople guys. Ian Hunter left Mott the Hoople. They had a band called Mott with Nigel Benjamin singing, I think. Then he left, and then they asked me if I'd join up. They asked me if I wanted to go and have a rehearsal with them and just throw a few ideas around. And we did, and we liked it, so we put something together there called British Lions.
British Lions.
Yeah, you probably never heard of that, but
no, you did 2 albums.
We did, yeah.
There you go. But that does feature Dale Griffin on drums.
Yeah, Dale, Buffin, as we called it. Bless him.
Yes.
He came up with the name British Lions, which I don't like. But, what is it? I mean, I think Watsy wanted us to be called Big Ben. So, I mean, I don't know. Anyway,
yes.
There you go. Morgan Fisher, who was in that band and Mott the Hoople, he came and finished off the gigs that we had in the book, and I was kind of deciding what to do. And that's when eventually, through Morgan, he came over to my house for dinner one night, and the phone was ringing all the time for him. And it was the guys in Mott the Hoople, Buffin and Watsy, saying, "Have you asked him yet? Have you asked him?" and then he came out with it. We're interested in whether you'd like to, maybe join up with us, or at least come and try out some stuff. And
yes.
I'd got a great song at the time that was I'd written for Peter and myself, called "One More Chance to Run."
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it was for Pete and me, so that we could, it would be the third time or whatever, with him coming back and trying to get this thing going again, So it was like, it was metaphorical or whatever, and it was also literal, and one more chance to run. So anyway, I just said, I got this song called "One More Chance to Run," and everybody went wild about it. And that started that off. And those guys were incredible, David. I mean, just amazing players.
Yes.
And if you want to be in a rock and roll band, I'd never been in a band before. I'd only been in a duo, and these guys were like thunder, benevolent thunder. They were superb.
Yes.
So yeah, we put that together, and we had a good time. It was a sad time in many ways, but it was a great time.
Yeah, I guess it was a transition, wasn't it, really, for you, as on many levels. And yes, and also there was quite a political change, wasn't there? The punk period had come in and sort of done a lot of kind of sweeping stuff away, and then was also politically, suddenly the end of the decade, Margaret Thatcher gets in, and then there's the Falkland War, isn't there, and the Greenham Common, the sort of the coal miners' strike and all that kind of stuff. So the 80s is quite an interesting decade. How do you then navigate your next step through that decade?
I think at that point, we'd been almost constantly on the road, for the whole of the 70s. So we had our first child in 1980. I had already got a daughter from a previous marriage who was with us, but at that time I decided to just hang out for a while and actually be a dad, be around for children. And
yes.
So that's kind of what I did, really, and did that for a while. I put my little studio together at the house and um, started writing songs again for whatever. I think I made an album called Return of the Buffalo.
Return of the
Um,
Buffalo, which is the one which does this come out? Did you record that in the 90s?
um, God, I can't remember. Could have been the 80s and
Yes,
80s
but
and,
you'd
and
been in another band, Box of Frogs, before that, hadn't you, in the 80s?
I forgot all about those. Well done, David.
Box of Frogs, which has another kind of, it's a bit of a supergroup again, isn't it? Because you have
Well,
Jim McCarty.
yeah, well, Jim called me because I was telling you about Keith Relf. Keith Relf and I were
Yes.
good friends, and like I said, he moved his family and lived next door to me. And so I met Jim and Paul and, everybody during that period of time. And so I was kind of part of that Yardbirds family in a way, So I got a phone call um, from Jim saying, um, we're looking for a singer who could play harmonica. Do you know anybody? No. And I thought, you're having a laugh here. I said, yeah, I know somebody. And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, yeah, me. And he said, yeah. So I went down to Jeff Beck's house with them all, and we just all had played some stuff, played some ideas out, and it was nice. It was really worked very well, and everybody enjoyed. And so they said, well, do you want to kind of join up? And we're thinking of making a new album. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. And I put this idea in the air, and I said, look, Keith was a good friend, and Keith, to me, was the singer with the Yardbirds. And no matter how much I may try, I'll never be the singer with the Yardbirds, because Keith Relf was the singer with the Yardbirds. And, out of respect for Keith, would you consider just changing the name of this thing? Because everybody will know who you are, because you're legends,
Mm.
Everyone will know who you are, and Keith will maintain his place as it should be, in my opinion. Anyway, it's changed ever since then, but in my opinion, Keith would maintain his rightful place as being the singer with the Yardbirds. And so that's how I approached that. And they all went away and thought about it. And, bless them, they came back and they said, yeah, we think that's a really good idea. And so somebody came up with the name Box of Frogs, which was like, for me, that was a bit like British Lions. I didn't like either name, but what's in a name?
Yes.
The Who. So anyway, that was thank you for reminding me of that, actually. That
Yeah.
was a really good time.
And you
And
play, I mean, the guest musicians, I mean, obviously the main band, the nucleus, is incredible. But then you have, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Earl Slick, Steve Hackett. I
yeah,
mean,
the oil. Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah.
it's
And, Rory, I knew Rory, so I got him involved, and Steve Hackett got him involved. Of course, Diesel Martin, I'd worked with and knew previous to this, and we were looking for another guitar player to be on most of the tracks, and David Diesel Martin, is a great guitar player, and he's very, and he's still with me playing on Heartwork and the last album, Warriors of Love.
yes.
And he's just great, and I got him involved, and everybody was kind of in with that as well. So we had a great mixture of people, and we made some demos, and in the UK, nobody was interested at all. No record company was interested whatsoever. So, it was like I thought, well, I'm going to go over to America and play these tapes to some people over there. So I went over to the States, and after about a year after we'd made the demos, and the UK had just said it's just a bunch of old so and so's, took it over to Capitol Records. I'd made a few records with a guy named John Carter, or Carter as he liked to be known. Who worked at Capitol, and he was a great producer and great guy. And I called him up and took in tapes, as they were in those days, actual tapes, and got in to see the main guys. And we're sitting around, and they were going, "Wow, this is incredible! It's like fantastic." And I said, "Well, if you think that's right, if you are really interested," and they said, "Oh, we are." And I said, "Well, call this number. This is our manager's number. Just call him now." And they did, because a lot of this is like rubbish. People talk, they talk and say, "Oh yeah, we'll call it," and they don't. So I said, "Look, do it now, while I'm standing here or sitting here, whatever. Call them," and they did. And so the conversation started, about that. Eventually, Capitol didn't sign us because our manager, Ernest Chapman, managed Jeff Beck, who was signed to Epic Records, and Epic wanted us. There were a lot of people wanted us. Atlantic wanted us. There was a guy named John Kolodner, who was a very famous A&R guy. He signed people like Aerosmith and all that. Very, very influential in the music business. He was saying, "Hey, John, this is inspired. This is truly inspired. We've got to talk." And I said, "Well, talk to Ernest and etc." So there was some negotiations all went on, and eventually Epic Records. Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing lineup and incredible kind of period of music. It was 84, obviously very much outside the kind of the mainstream of Duran Duran and Sade. And
well, that's why nobody was interested in the UK. Absolutely
yes,
no one.
but America likes.
We were the number one rock track, the number one rock album, and heavy rotation MTV, and in the top 40 with a bullet. So it was completely different over there. They loved their rock and roll over there, and over here we had, whatever it was.
Nothing. So that was fantastically successful. Did you tour that album at all?
No, the guys didn't want to tour, unfortunately. Very sad. Yeah.
And then was that because you bring a second album out, but you're not so involved with that one, are you?
No, I left. I couldn't deal with it anymore. We made a really good first album, and then there was more. The guys wanted to turn it into a project, and so there were all these really non-rock and roll, dreadful ideas coming out, in my opinion.
Yes.
And Jeff Beck and myself were sitting. Jeff would come to maybe play on the second album, and he came down, sat by me, he said, "John, I've just heard you've left." And I said, "Yeah, I just can't. This is not for me." I'd written a load of songs, and in like the vein of the first album, which was rock and roll, blues rock and roll. And he said, "So you've gone?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Thank fuck for that. Let's go down the pub. I don't want to play on this."
But you do guest on a couple of the tracks, don't you? Or not guest, but you.
Well, it started out, with the same kind of principle. So, there's a track on there called "Asylum," which
Yes.
Jimmy's on, and Jimmy plays a great solo. He makes you think you're at a festival. You're like in a big, massive open air festival, and he just does a great thing there. So there's a few tracks on there where it was all working well, and then it started to convert into something else. So, and who am I? I was 1/4 of the band. There were 4 of us, and the 3 guys decided they wanted to take it a different way.
Yeah. On one of the, or two of the on 2 of the tracks that you sing and wrote, you've got is it Carol Thompson and also Judy Roberts, who was in Working Week at that stage, weren't they? That kind of soul funk outfit from the early 80s or mid 80s.
Well, I don't know, because what happened was, after I left, things were done to tracks, and things were done to things that I had nothing to do with. So, I still own 1/4 of the album, but I'm not, I walked away from it.
You walked away. Are you pleased with the one with Jimmy Page on those, Asylum? Does that still sound okay?
Yeah, I like that track. Yeah, I like that track. But, once the magic spell is broken, it's hard, and then the guys didn't want to tour, and that's what happened, you see. And Epic said, well, if you don't want to tour, we're dropping you. So they dropped them anyway. And it was such a sad thing. It was a very, very misguided move to be made, and like I said, Jeff didn't want to play on it either. And he was very relieved to hear that I wasn't doing any more on it. And it becomes very political, and for me, I love the guys, and I'm so happy with the first album. We still talk. We all know what went on, and we all know why the whole thing was dropped by Epic. We all know, and so that's out in the open, and Jim and I still talk. Paul Samuel Smith and I still talk. I love them both, and poor Chris is not very well. So it's just a difficult time. It was a difficult time. I think, the guys, they loved that first album, but they found it a little bit difficult to relinquish maybe their seniority.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And, they were looking for a writer and a singer, and they got one, and then they weren't sure that's really what they wanted. They wanted to just mess around in the studio, which I don't want to do. I want to write songs, and which we can play out on the road, like the first album we did, which was so live, and playable, and interesting and exciting,
Yes. So then, is the next
they've all carried on playing, except obviously Paul didn't. He never was going to go on the road anyway. But Jim and Chris carried on with the Yardbirds, and I think Jim's even out there now. He's 80, I think, or 80 something.
Yeah, I did. I think it was 5 or 6 years ago. I did an interview. I can't remember what he was promoting, whether it was an album or a book, or it must have been an album, I guess.
He's very busy. He's a lovely, creative guy, Jim.
Yeah, amazing.
Fantastic
Still doing it. So the next recording session then was your solo work, Return of the Buffalo. Is that right? On Red Steel Music.
It was. It did come out on Red Steel. Yeah.
And there you go. You're back. You were back. This was the John Major years of the 90s. So, was this? Did you get a band or get sort of musicians together to record this album?
Well, it's like I played most of it myself. So, I think I had a good friend named Lawrence Archer. Lawrence played some solos and stuff on it. Trying to think who else was on it.
Was it James? Was James Fox on it as well?
I think James might have played a bass on a couple of tracks.
Right. Clive Edwards, Mark Lockhurst. Are these names?
I think they were. I don't think they played on the album, but they did. We did go out and play some gigs, and I think maybe that's where James came in, James Fox. But I think Lawrence, he actually played guitar on some of the tracks, and Clive didn't play any drums on the album. I programmed them all. I programmed all the drums and played the bass and all the keyboards, most of the backing vocals, all the backing vocals, and then added a friend of mine named Lou Stonebridge played or sang rather some backing vocals as well. So it was mainly just me. And The Return of the Buffalo, the title of it is about, you're talking about like communes and all this kind of stuff earlier on. And the Native American Indian was the basis for a lot of those kind of ideals, because, they lived a very holistic life, they lived very peaceful lives. And, there was obviously skirmishes between some of the tribes, but that's territory, and they didn't, until the white man came, genocide happened, basically. It was all very, very holistic, and a lot of it revolved around the buffalo, which was, a staple for everything. I mean, they loved, they worshipped basically, and didn't disrespect the animal that brought them life, in every single way, shelter from the storm, clothes to wear, food to eat, etc. So Return of the Buffalo was about, looking for lovers and searching for soul, and the return of the buffalo, and get away from the whatever the 80s was bringing along, which was very much started in the 70s, when the accountants took over the record companies in the 70s.
Yes.
It filtered heavily into the 80s, and it all became about money and greed, and creativity was just like you mean you have to be good to you have to like actually have songs, yet actually it's not just a marketing deal. No. So Return of the Buffalo was about trying to just bring back the memory of the spirit of that kind of feeling,
Yeah. And then you've done, just bringing it up to date, you did another one, The Big Buffalo, which came out on Angel Air.
It was it was the same album, but it was just added tracks,
Right.
And I didn't like the name The Big Buffalo, but it was a bigger version of Return of the Buffalo.
Right.
In fact, I'm just about to re-release Return of the Buffalo on my little record label.
Oh, got you. Yes. And then State of the Art Heart is another release that you brought out as well, wasn't
Yeah.
it?
I like the way you said that, because it is meant to be like that. Not sure whether you're saying state of the art or state of the heart.
I was going to.
It's like heart work,
Yes.
I loved. I've got, like, when I was making heart work, I've got, on computers you have folders with information in, and I've got one called artwork, and it's just great.
So that, coming up to the current day then, your latest albums, this is Warriors of Love, isn't it? Your last one?
Last one was Warriors of Love, yeah.
And before that you had Heartwork, didn't you? The album.
No, the new album is Heartwork.
Right.
The brand new album is Heartwork.
And that's...
And the previous one was Warriors of Love.
There you go. I got it all. That's all good. So were these both recorded during Well, the last one, Heartwork, was that recorded during lockdown or written in lockdown?
Warriors of Love was written during lockdown.
Yes.
Heartwork was written over 2023.
Blimey, there you go. And you've got your own studio at home now.
Yeah, I recorded the Warriors of Love at home, and Return of the Buffalo was recorded at home. State of the Heart was all demos and recorded at home. There's another album called Philosophical, which was recorded at home. Yeah, I haven't recorded a studio somewhere else album since probably since Box of Frogs.
Right. It's all go. My God, because you've been sort of cleaning up all your archives, haven't you? I mean, I noticed on your website there's a lot of bits and pieces, live recordings, yes, anthologies and everything else. Have you been focused on doing that in the last few years, sort of getting a bit of a grip on all your kind of work since the beginning?
Well, a lot of my output contractually came back to me, that after periods of time when you lease your work out to somebody, after usually 5 years, they come back to you, and so a lot of my stuff came back to me. And yeah, I mean, if I was more of a businessman, I'd be a lot more active on all that stuff. But I'm just purely really focused on creativity, and so I'm my own worst enemy, because I put out albums and then I can't, I'm on to the next one.
Yes.
And I don't have a manager at the moment, so I realize fully why people have managers now, because I need one.
You probably, yes, absolutely. But you're playing live as well, aren't you? You're sort of coming out and got some dates.
I am now, yeah. I got a clean bill of health from my cardiologist.
Oh, right. Did you
So,
have a sort of health scare recently?
well, it's been for the last 8 years, I suppose, something like that. But I was signed off a couple of months ago, which was a major step, So because in 2016 I came back. I was living in the USA and came back to the UK, and I was playing a gig in the Midlands and I collapsed on stage. So that was 2016, and was taken from the gig into a hospital for a few days, and I couldn't do anything in terms of that kind of energy, kind of energy output.
Yes.
So I had to just stop. And for a while, like I said, I've just been signed off. So, you know, it was a disappointing thing to happen at that time, because I'm 76 now. So, the last 6 or 7 or 8 years would have been a good time to be out there on the road, but because I had much more energy, except that I fucking well collapsed. Excuse my French.
Yes.
And I had that issue. But, stuff happens and you got to deal with it,
Yes. Well, it was the
So,
same. So was it a heart issue that you had that sort of?
yeah. Yeah.
I think David Bowie had the same, didn't he? His had a heart.
I didn't have anything like, valve replacements or anything like that. But my heart was running at 240 beats a minute. So it was quite fast.
Yes, my God, that's terrible. And they took 8 years to get that sorted, and then that's it. You're fine.
To the point where they're happy that I won't collapse again. But, I mean, the thing is, as you get older, things happen, things start to drop off,
This is true.
So just keep on going as long as you can. But
Absolutely.
I couldn't not take their advice. It's like, well, it was a thing, you can do so much, but until you get the proper green light, you may as well do what they say,
Yes, you don't want to
instead of
jinx it.
jeopardizing the work you've already done to try and get fit or better, you know.
Yes. Well, that's brilliant. Well, you're coming to Cromer, which I'm very excited by. I see.
I am indeed, yeah.
The 12th of July. This is it. Are you part of an event, or is this just a one-off gig?
It's just me, yeah. It's a one-off gig. Yeah, I mean, we used to come up and play the West Runton Pavilion.
Of course, yes. I've got a book with all the dates of all the people who have played there, actually, which I haven't got next to me. But yes, the West Runton Pavilion. You must have thought you were coming to the end of the world, really, at that stage, because it's
Well,
right.
we went to we played at the end of the world everywhere, before, so it didn't matter. Everywhere's good. Everywhere's the beginning of the world.
Yes.
When you get there, So, yeah, we played there. As in Medicine Head and British Lions. Rocked the place, and then it fell down.
I know. Then it's sort of finished. Wow, this is brilliant. Well, if I'm sort of in the area, I must come and have a sort of visit to the Cromer, not the Cromer Pavilion, is it? But it's up in sort of Cromer land somewhere.
I think
The
it's
Community Association, which is
something like that. Some kind of art center, community center. Yeah, it should be good, and I'm really looking forward to it. Actually,
yes,
good memories of being in Cromer.
Yeah. And just last question, if you could have whispered something to your 16-year-old self starting out, is there anything in particular that you would have gone, yes, that's a really good thing that I could have done, or could have nudged myself in some direction or avoided something?
Well, I always say, where my heart leads, that's where I follow. So, I kind of, I have so many different ways of saying that. I navigate with my soul compass. Where my heart leads, I follow. Believe in yourself is what it's saying. Believe in yourself, and be kind, be thoughtful, be caring, share all the good stuff.
Yes.
And there you go. Trust in yourself, believe in yourself, be kind to everybody, and just let your heart lead you.
Yes, you can't go wrong then.
I know I'm an old hippie, man. This is the way it goes, and I still believe in that stuff. And I say to my kids, for what, if I was talking to a child of mine, which I've talked to many times, obviously, my thoughts are for them is to, in life, if you have anything that you like or you love, try to do something involved in that, because that's how you maintain your involvement, your interest, your involvement, because you already are there, and I was lucky because I don't know, we were lucky, but we made our own luck, and we worked hard, and I think that's what is paramount, really. Is to get out, knock on doors. Don't wait for someone to come and tell you what you can do. Don't wait for the limo, which is like promoted so badly these days. Just get out and play and see what's happening. And it's very, very difficult for bands these days because you've got things like Spotify, etc., where they pay a young artist nothing at all. So it's very difficult for them to get the money together to make a record. To record an album. It's very, very difficult these days. I think for young people, but being young people, they're going to create the new type of revolution, whatever that is, and get out and play. And
Yes.
I mean, the live music is coming back, because it'll never die. It's just it's something that's so totally spiritual, built in to our hearts and souls. You've got to get out and play. Music is such a communicator, it's a bringer together, it's a healer, it's everything.
Yeah. And just, I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, what was your relationship with Ricky Clark? Was he part of a band at one stage, or was he?
No, Ricky used to work for us. He used to do our sound.
Oh, he was your sound man.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, crazy. It was straight after art school, and Rick didn't know what he was going to do. So I said, well, we don't know either. So get in the van.
Get in the van and let's see where the road takes us, I suppose. Yes, that's amazing.
He made a really good life out of sound. He had a company called the Sound Company or something, something very simple like that. But he traveled the world with his own company that did mostly like stage shows. He got involved with, Drury Lane and all that. And yeah, he was great, Rick.
Yeah, amazing.
Best friends ever.
So sweet. Oh, look, John, thank you ever so much for this. This has been amazing. And I will, yes, check out more of your solo albums in the next week. But look, thank you. And I hope to catch you in Cromer, which would be splendid. Okay, take care. And if you want, I can always send you the link to this, and then you could always use it on your website.
I would like it, actually. I'll see how you manage to edit this down to 20
minutes.
15 minutes.
15 minutes of just snappy bits. Anyway, look, have a lovely evening. Take care. And yes, keep rocking. Okay, thanks a lot, John.
You too, Dave.
Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. You probably gathered that. Anyway, a massive thank you to John Fiddler for giving me the time for that. And I'll put the website below in the notes so you can click on and find out all the material that has been coming out, and also some gigs here, there and everywhere. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 show. You'll get there. And also all these interviews have been archived. You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.